It's live.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Rabb, and I have the great privilege of being the president of Hunter College, where the American dream still comes true. We are one of the extraordinary public institutions located in the district of one of the great public representatives, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, who is an extraordinary friend of higher education and all of civic engagement in New York City. I'm thrilled to welcome the committee here, the members of the panel, and to all the committee members in Washington. We're so grateful that you've chosen Hunter College to highlight this really critical issue of the gender wage gap, which, as we all know, has been exacerbated through the pandemic. As the Congresswoman knows, and she's been such an incredible supporter of public higher education, this is a wonderful place to have this important conversation because Hunter College was started 151 years ago by an Irish immigrant who was asked to leave Ireland because his ideas of education were too progressive. He believed that women should be educated, that women should have the right to a higher education. And Hunter was the 9th college in the United States to accept women into training. We started as a teacher's college and then expanded into all sorts, every kind of educational opportunity, undergraduate and graduate. And Congresswoman and members of Congress, I'm so pleased to tell you that this week we graduated 4,000 students, notwithstanding the pandemic, have degrees and are going on to make the world safer and to help us rebuild. And Congresswoman, I know you're going to be very proud. We had 14 valedictorians, and all of them were women. 9 were children of immigrants. As I say, the American dream still coming true, and 1 was an immigrant herself. So we have been devoted to the issues of women's equity. I'm thrilled that one of our panelists today is Professor Jennifer Gabori, who's an expert on gender equity, as a member of our Women's Studies Department. And we are here to help support through research, focus, and education this incredible initiative and support to make sure that women finally, after all of these years, get the equal pay that we all deserve. The Hunter College motto is Mihi Cura Futuri. The care of the future is mine. And we commit through that motto to supporting the work of you, the panelists, and the congressmen and women to help move this agenda forward through our academic experts and our scholars and our ability to convene and be advocates. So thank you for allowing us to host this important conversation. Congressman Maloney, thank you for your steadfast support of Hunter College and all public higher education in our city. And it is a pleasure to welcome all of you here this morning. Thank you.
Thank President Jennifer Rabb for extraordinary leadership, not only here at Hunter, but in our great city. Hunter is one of our finest institutions, not just in New York City and state, but I'd say in the whole country, with the advancement and opportunity and diversity and high standard of education that it supplies. It has also been a center for conferences, for thought, for advancement, particularly at the Eleanor Roosevelt Center for discussion that Jennifer Rabb actually founded and rehabilitated and made happen. So I want to thank you for all of your extraordinary leadership in so many ways. And I'm excited to welcome all of our guests today, all of our panelists. Welcome all of you to the Committee on Government Oversight and Reform, our roundtable on examining the long-term impacts of gender wage gap on moms. Today's panel is, of course, here at Hunter College, and we're also live streaming this conversation to the public. Committee members are joining us via Zoom, and they will be participating with us virtually. As a mother myself, I have personally experienced the discrimination and hardships that many women face in the workplace. I can remember applying for jobs and being told, we can't hire you. You're married. You're a mother. We can't hire you. You won't work hard. What do you mean I'm not going to work hard? I need a job. I remember when I had my first child going to the personnel office and inquiring about leave policies. And I was told there are no leave policies. Women just leave. And I said, I don't want to leave. Well, we expect you to leave. I said, well, I'm not leaving. And they said, this will be the first time that that has happened. And so we've made great progress. I was able to keep my job, but they threatened to fire me and all kinds of things. So it's been very, very difficult for working mothers. Things have improved since I had young children, but they haven't really changed enough. And we must make more progress so that mothers are supported and fairly compensated for the incredible work that they do. Nearly 2 decades ago, I released a report with Representative John Dingell. It was called A New Look at the Glass Ceiling, which looked at women in key industries and looked not only at when they went into work, but 5 years out when they went into management. And it showed, because of work in Congress and the women's movement and labor, men and women often entered the workforce at equal pay. But 5 years out, when you went into management, when you went into promotions, the discrimination gaps were absolutely huge, sometimes more than 20 points. It also showed that in times of prosperity, when you would think it would narrow the wage gap, it broadened it. So it documented that. I have done several of those, and I'm going to issue a report today, request a GAO with the women members and like-minded men on the committee, requesting a new look at the glass ceiling, a new GAO report that will measure if we've made any significant progress. I will note that women of color and women in different stages in their careers were affected differently in the disparities. So today's meeting is a sequel to an important hearing that we had in our committee in March 24th, which is Women's Equal Pay Day. And as we know, Women's Equal Pay Day is not a celebration. It's a day to recognize how far we still have to go to close the gender wage gap in our country. And today's roundtable highlights Mom's Equal Pay Day. And that day marks how many extra days women with children must work to be paid the same amount as their male counterparts. These women must work over 5 extra months just to earn the same amount as a man. This is totally unfair. I remember stories and experiences in my own life. If a man became a father, he got a raise. If a mother became a mother and was working, she was often demoted, moved to part-time, or even fired. On average, working women are still paid only 82 cents for every dollar paid to a man. And mothers are even farther behind. Moms earn 70 cents for every dollar paid to fathers, and single mothers bring in just 54 cents for every dollar earned by married men. The gender gap is even worse for many women of color. For example, Latina mothers are paid just 45 cents for every dollar paid to white fathers. Native American women and Black mothers are paid only 50 cents and 52 cents respectively for every dollar paid to white fathers. In our hearing that we had earlier, we not only documented the wage gap, but we documented the wage wealth gap, I will call. It was how much women lost over a lifetime because of the wage differential. And it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it contributed to women being the largest segment of poverty, older women in our country. The corona pandemic has only made the wage gap for women with children worse. Women make up a majority of healthcare and social service workers and have disproportionately shouldered the burden of essential work during the pandemic, working on the front lines. Nearly 3 million U.S. women have dropped out of the labor force in this past year, and we need solutions to help mothers not only return to work, but to thrive in the workplace. I am pleased that the House Education and Labor Committee took one important step just last week by adopting my Providing Urgent Maternal Protections for Nursing Mothers Act, or the PUMP Act. I remember how tough it was to be a new mom. This bill will ensure more working women are given the time and privacy that they need to pump at work to keep themselves and their infants healthy. Another crucial step is making sure the federal government is a model employer in supporting working mothers and families. And that's why I have long championed legislation to help women. The first bill that I voted on in Congress was the Family and Medical Leave Act. The first bill I worked on with then Senator Biden was the Violence Against Women Act. And I've long championed from I first came paid leave for the birth of a child. The United States and Papua New Guinea were the only two countries in the world that did not provide support for the birth of a child. Finally, we passed it last year, and it came out of the committee that I now chair. I'm very proud of that, and this is a great success for Congress. The passage of the Federal Employee Paid Leave Act, which provides federal employees up to 12 weeks of paid time for parental leave. And as I said, we need to expand that to cover paid family and medical leave for federal employees, which I hope we will pass this year and serve as a model to the private sector to do the same. My friend Representative DeLauro has a bill in that will do just that. No one should be unable to care for their families because they can't afford to take the necessary time off for work or for family meetings or for meetings with schools. And today we will also discuss the Biden-Harris administration support for working moms through the American Families Plan, which is a very great proposal they put forward. That plan would make crucial investments in childcare, paid leave, providing a major boost to the economic well-being of women and children. Finally, we will talk about reforms that promote an equitable and inclusive economic recovery for mothers across the U.S. so that our response to the pandemic leads not only to recovery, but to a more equitable future. As chairwoman of the Oversight Committee, I will continue to seek meaningful solutions to these problems until women's work is valued equally. Our work is not done yet. I'm thrilled to have an incredible set of people here. I first want to welcome my colleague in government, Senator Jessica Ramos, who is leading this effort and fight in the Assembly and the Senate. I want to present her with one of my books, which is called Rumors of Our Progress Have Been Greatly Exaggerated, Why Women's Lives Are Not Getting Any Better. But thankfully, to Jessica, women's lives are getting better, and to the women I see on the panel and like-minded men that have joined us, they've all worked hard to advance equality and opportunity for women. I really want to first introduce Julie Suk, Professor of Sociology and Political Science at the CUNY Graduate Center, Senior Research Scholar at Yale Law School, and the mother of two. And I also want to point out that Senator Jessica Ramos is the chair of the Labor Committee, and she's also represents District 13. She is a working mother. She has two young boys. We will also hear from Denora Getachew, CEO of DoSomething.org, who has three beautiful children. And I also welcome Seher Kawaje, Senior Attorney for Economic Empowerment at Legal Momentum and the Women's Legal Defense and Education Fund. She has a 5-year-old and a baby on the way. And lastly, we are joined by Jennifer Gabui, lecturer and advisor in the Women and Gender Studies Department here at Hunter College. Thank you so much for joining us, for all of your hard work. And I'd like to thank all those incredible panelists for coming today in person. This is really one of the few in-person things, probably the first that I've done since the pandemic hit us. I feel like it's a coming out party, a time to really get together and talk. And I think I want to give each of them an opportunity to comment on the key issues that we are discussing today. And then we're going to open it up really for questions from the panelists, but also my members of Congress. I see Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who is a mother of three, and has worked very hard on these issues of balance. And of course, the icon, an inspiration, a mentor to me when I came to college, even before college, the great historic Eleanor Holmes Norton. Thank you, Eleanor, for all that you've done for all of us in your long career of service. And she is leading the charge in our country now to make the District of Columbia the 51st state, which is long, long overdue. We thank you. And I see like-minded, wonderful men that support us, and we thank them. Your presence speaks very, very strongly to your values and your support, and it makes me happy to see you. Thank you so much for being with us. So I'm going to allow everybody to make a statement, and then I think our members of Congress should be the first to ask questions, and we will then continue our discussion. So Jessica Ramos, the great senator from Queens.
Can I take this one?
Sure.
I know we're all trying to still be very, very careful. Oh, I have to press the mic. Okay, as if I wasn't loud enough. Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Jessica Ramos. I'm the state senator representing District 13 in Queens. I happen to be the mother of two rambunctious boys who are 8 and 10, and I also chair the Labor Committee in the New York State Senate. So I think about being a mom and I think about work all day, every day. And it's really been a wonder to figure out how we're charting our path towards the future within the scheme of work, given all of the changes that we've seen throughout the pandemic. Now, we knew that there were so many challenges before the pandemic when it came to equal pay, when it comes to discrimination at work, whether it's challenging to find that work-life balance. And I think that's especially true for those of us who are in government and many others who work very long hours and don't necessarily spend a lot of time with our children. I mean, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm no longer with the father of my children. And so having split custody, having to pay child support, not seeing my children as frequently as I'd like and be as involved in their academic life as I would like, it makes me want to cry just actually saying that out loud. It's been really heart-wrenching, but at the same time, fulfilling in my drive to ensure that every woman in our state and in our country is able to fulfill her dreams and feel as whole as possible. Because women are not just moms, and we're not just workers, and we're not just wives. And we can do and be whatever we want to be. And I'm very eager to read this book. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Maloney. Not only do I like the cheeky title, which is very you, I love that. But it's true. We are a long ways away from so many of the benefits and rights that have been made possible in other parts of this planet for so many women and for so many parents, and really establishing parenthood on a much more even keel. You know, in the New York State Senate, I have a bill to bring childcare to New York City, and we're actually in the process of amending it. It's likely going to be my #1 priority for the next legislative session in 2022. As of now, what we're proposing is a very modest payroll tax to big businesses, the top 5% of big businesses in New York State, meaning businesses whose payroll is on average more than $250 million a year. They would be paying less than 0.5% of a tax in order to provide New York parents with affordable, if not free, childcare. I don't know how people who earn minimum wage make ends meet, to be honest with you. This is why I have a bill to peg our minimum wage to inflation in New York State. And this is, in my opinion, of course, where exactly we should be moving our economy towards. We need to help people be happier. And I truly do believe that in helping parents spend more time with their children, not have to work, 2 part-time jobs and then have a hustle on the side in order to make ends meet, we can see our children achieve, their their educational potential, and hopefully, of course, have brighter futures than we ever dreamed of. I think that's the gist. I'm happy to talk about everything that we've been doing in the state Senate in order to advance this cause, making sure that women are at the forefront. And when we talk about an inclusive and fair economic recovery, that women really are not only partakers but drivers in that conversation. I mean, I always say when it comes to our pay gap and pay inequality, there's no greater remedy for this than collective bargaining. We want those salaries written down in a contract where it says that we get equal pay for equal work. And it's the best way to enforce that, in my opinion, before the courts. But we've done a lot to advance, how the human rights law and how the law sees us as workers, and making it easier, lowering the threshold for us to bring cases before the court and prove wage discrimination. But thank you for having me here. It's an incredibly important topic to be discussing today, and hopefully this conversation with many more and our work will lead to a better financial stability for women.
Thank you. We're going to go around the room to Nora.
Thank you, and sorry. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to be here with you. I'm Denora Gatacho. I am currently the CEO of a national nonprofit called DoSomething.org. We are a 28-year-old tech-forward nonprofit focused on activating young people for social impact, really with a focus on young millennials and Gen Z. And I'll circle back to in a second how that's relevant to this conversation. But I come to this work as someone who has dedicated her entire career to a democracy, creating and establishing a democracy that's accessible, inclusive, representative, and most importantly, equitable. And I think at the center of that is really this conversation we're having today about where moms and the mothers who have been doing the lion's share of the work in our society for far too long fit in that dialogue. What I'm thinking of in this moment is honestly building on Senator Ramos's comment. I'm a mother of three. I had a son who is now a 24-year-old, but I had him as a senior in high school. And that shaped entirely my experience of motherhood, but also what it meant to be a mother now to 9 and 10-year-old girls. And this pandemic has laid bare those and exacerbated the inequities that we haven't been talking about for far too long. And in fact, I would say as a Black woman, we've talked so much about the racial reckoning, but we haven't talked about the gender reckoning, right? I was fortunate or unfortunate, I guess it depends on the day that I think about it, to be able to take 6 months out of the workforce during this pandemic to focus on my young children because my family could afford for me to do that. But there are so many women who couldn't afford to do that. There were so many women who were pushed as frontline workers who had to be there every day to provide all of the necessities that we needed to navigate this pandemic. And yet we still are having conversations about the need for equal pay. I think what's disheartening about that is when I think about my young daughters, we want to model for them the society they want to live in, and Gen Z is unequivocal and unapologetic about being the beneficiaries of the change they seek in this moment, right? And I think that is inspiring, and yet I don't have the answer to my young daughters, 9 and 10-year-old girls, about when we're going to have full equality, be that racial equality or gender equality. But I'm glad that we're having this conversation today to have it front and center as a part of the public dialogue, and I applaud the Congress members who were here to be a part of that conversation, but also to help push it forward. Because I think when you look at leaders like Reshma Shajani, who are pushing the Marshall Plan from others, you look at Congressmember Meng, who's got her resolution pending, we need those solutions and we need them now so that in 20 years when my daughters are of age to be mothers and are in the workforce, that they're not having the same conversation that we're having now. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here with you today to talk about that important work and make sure that we are actually achieving equal pay for mothers instead of talking about the need for it.
Women were paid 82 cents to the dollar. And I've tracked this the whole time I've been in Congress. And it's like stuck. For 30 years, it's been stuck there. It doesn't move. And it was even, I remember when I started working, it was 59 cents to the dollar. We got a raise, but it's still unfair. And so finding out how we can really try to achieve that. And when they go to court, they always win because equality and discrimination against women is not protected. We haven't passed the Equal Rights Amendment, so you can't enforce equal pay for equal work. So let's go around the room. I just had to say, you're right, at 82 cents to the dollar, we do have to figure out how to move that. Anyway.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Maloney and Senator Ramos, for your leadership on gender justice issues. It is a privilege to be here today to talk about this critically important issue at a critical juncture on Mom's Equal Pay Day. My name is Sahara Khwaja. As the chairwoman mentioned, I work for Legal Momentum, the Women's Legal Defense and Education Fund. We have, unfortunately, been pushing forward, fighting for over 5 decades now to advance gender equality through the law. And, as we've heard, this is a difficult uphill battle that we're fighting. It's unacceptable that today Latina mothers make 42 cents to the dollar for every white father. This should not be. So in 2017, Legal Momentum launched our Women Valued initiative. And one of the goals with this initiative was to really pivot and shift the way we do legislative advocacy and educational work so that we are shining in the spotlight and listening to the voices of women who are most undervalued in our economy and women who are most underserved by our current laws. And that includes women of color, women, the disproportionate number of women doing low-wage work, immigrant women, and victims of gender-based violence. And so we're charging ahead, and I'm looking forward to discussing the various legislative initiatives that we are working on.
Good morning. My name is Julie Sook. I'm a professor of sociology and political science here at CUNY at the Graduate Center, and also a visiting research scholar at Yale Law School. I'm a scholar of comparative constitutional law, specifically gender equality provisions in constitutions around the world, as well as anti-discrimination law and employment discrimination law, and the author of We the Women, a recent book about the history of the Equal Rights Amendment. And I'm thrilled to be here this morning. Just yesterday, I was actually in Seneca Falls, New York, and I realized that the struggle for mom's equal pay does not begin today, and in fact did not even begin when Representative Maloney was applying for a job. It actually began in 1848 when Lucretia Mott at Seneca Falls drafted a resolution calling for women's equal participation in the trades and professions, in work and life outside of the home. She understood that women were also mothers, but that mothers at the time had very few legal rights, even to own the earnings that they made should they work outside the home. And that resolution that was born in 1848 at Seneca Falls then did not become law at that time. Alice Paul then in 1923 called for an equal rights amendment to the US Constitution. And even though the Equal Rights Amendment as proposed then, involved many issues. One of the central issues was the problem of women's access to work and equal treatment in the workplace. And that carries forward even 50 years after that was introduced in the early 1970s, 50 years ago from today. The theme of women's equal access to employment was important as we were thinking about laws around anti-discrimination, equal pay, as well as the constitutional amendment on equal rights for women, the Equal Rights Amendment. And certainly unequal pay in the workplace, both the public sector and the private sector, is a very important and significant and enduring manifestation of women's second-class citizenship status. That's something that has been laid bare by the coronavirus pandemic, because it's not only that women have been overrepresented in essential work and other low-wage jobs, but also that when schools shut down and daycare shut down because of the public health emergency, it was women, and particularly mothers, who became homeschool teachers, had to do 2 jobs, although they weren't necessarily compensated for all that extra work. And the childcare burdens also left to millions of women leaving the workforce. Of the over 5 million jobs that have been lost because of the pandemic, the vast overwhelming majority of those jobs have been women's jobs. And although we will make an economic recovery, now that we're seeing light at the end of the tunnel, it will take a while for women to come back to the levels, both in terms of employment levels as well as pay levels, unless there are strong interventions in public policy. So I'm thrilled to be here to discuss these issues with you. There are many other countries that have taken different approaches that I think we can learn from, and I hope we can speak to those as well.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm Jen Gabori. I teach here in the Department of Women and Gender Studies. One of the core concepts we teach in my department is that of intersectionality. One of my, among the different things that many of my colleagues have already highlighted today is the problem with using, the trickiness of using this 82% figure, right? So like, if I like print out a chart, right, of the wage gap, of course, we see 6 different race categories. I would also want to add disabled moms or disabled women. I would also want to add trans women, right, to this. And then we can begin to also talk about the ways in which I would like to see the American Community Survey and the census, right, be more mindful in the collection of our data to make it much more easier for us to use the census data as researchers to better generate, right, to better generate charts like this, because I already start to see the problems, right, even within these, right, boxes. And it's, right, part of the trickiness of how we do this work representationally. I have a 6-year-old kid. I dropped him off this morning, or I didn't drop him off because my spouse dropped him off because I am here. But when my spouse dropped him off this morning, it's a pleasure. When my spouse dropped him off this morning, I'm thrilled that he was met by a African-American man at his learning lab where he does his remote school. But that African-American man is one of 12 workers at that learning center, and he is the only man in the building. One of the ways in which I hope we can continue to think about the wage gap is also what it means to move men into what we think of as the caring professions. My mom's a nurse. I know that her nurses union is extremely mindful about the recruiting of men into the caring professions. This is right, some of you, no doubt many of us here in New York City have seen the Men Can Teach ad, right, on the subways, and I'm thrilled, right, to see this. I would also like to see, and we'll talk to President Raab about Men Can Nurse, right, into the nursing program. The nursing program here at Hunter College recently graduated 79% of its bachelor's degrees were for women and 19% for men, and it would be great to see parity in that. I also would like to ask here, since it's an opportunity to speak to this in sort of to members of Congress, I believe the last time significantly that we looked at the question of equity in vocational training was back in around 2006. And that there's a question of enforcement around the question of achieving gender equity in vocational education programs, and that they remain like lots of the kinds of programs and the pay gap, they remain stuck, right? So that if you look at welding programs, they remain persistently 95% men, and if you look at cosmetology programs, they remain persistently 95% women, and these two training programs are looked at precisely because they have remained mirrors of each other and have remained stuck. I'm thrilled about the letters of recommendation that I wrote for my students to go to law school, to go to medical school, but I'm also concerned about like my colleagues at City Tech here within the City University of New York, because when I look at the demographic data of the school, I see occupational silos. I see gender segregation across the kind of vocational training that they are receiving. And so while I think for many of us here within the university that we are focused on like things like medical school and law school, I am also concerned about like hospitality training and like what that looks like and the ways in which that creates pay silos, right, that overlap, right, with the class and race segregation issues that we would like to see. Congratulations, Chair Maloney, on the PUMP Act. It would be great to see, I was thinking when you were saying this, knowing that I was going to talk about men, I was thinking about how great it would be to see a PSA for the PUMP Act where a woman had pumped milk at work and then a father was feeding the bottle to their child as an image for it. I also really would like to hear more about the prospects for what is happening and what we think we can get done within the kind of Biden-Harris plan for the promotion of families, but also in terms of the prospects for the Universal Child Care and Early Learning Act, maybe this year or soon. Okay. but thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I really appreciate it.
I'm a former chair of the Census Subcommittee, and I take it as a prime area of work. The census numbers are coming out at the end of September. Then we start working on the next census, and we can work together to get those changes to be more reflective of all people in America. And I now would like to recognize the great Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton for 3 minutes. Oh, we can't.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Maloney, for calling us together on this important topic, which needs the kind of examination we're giving it this morning. And I want to know what you have named this discussion, examining the long-term impacts of the gender wage gap on moms. Well, that's very frightening to hear the word long-term, because I'm assuming that it is particularly, it particularly notes during this pandemic where the wage gap has worsened, and apparently the number of women working is at the lowest since 1988. So we were already low, and it looks like we've had a setback during this pandemic where women had to more often than men stay at home with children who were getting their education at the same time. So my question for anyone on the panel is, do you think after we recover from the pandemic as we are now, that women will at least come back to where they were before the pandemic, that women's employment will rebound when people are vaccinated and we're back to work? Or do you think that perhaps that will not occur and Congress should take action? And if so, what action would you advise Congress to take to make sure that this rebound occurs? Anyone on the panel? I'd be interested to hear.
I'm going to throw the question to begin with Professor Sook. If you could start off the discussion. Thank you. She's even written a book on the subject.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I do think that it's possible for women to come back to the levels, but I don't think it'll happen automatically or very quickly without intervention by public policy. So one thing that the pandemic did lay bare is that even before the pandemic, the lack of access to affordable, high-quality childcare really did prevent women's full and equal participation in the workplace, because many sociologists have studied the fact that women do a disproportionate share of caregiving. And also, sociologists and economists, even before the pandemic, showed that the gender wage gap, which before the pandemic was around 80 or 82 cents to the man's dollar, and much lower than that for women of color, that if you controlled that for motherhood, if you compared childless women to men with children or without children, that the gap would narrow. So I think it's very clear that access to childcare and long-term permanent support for the childcare sector is extremely important to women's reentry into the workplace at the same levels and with the same pay as they had before the pandemic, and moving beyond where we were at the onset of the pandemic. I will also point out, though, that one of the difficulties that we're seeing, particularly with public policy responses that take these problems into account, the inequalities faced by women in particular, or even racial minorities who have also been disproportionately hit by the pandemic. These are things that public policy has to take into account. And I will note that just last week, in a Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals decision, Vitolo versus Guzman, a judge found that a priority given to small businesses owned by women and minorities was actually a violation of the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, that was found to be a form of race and sex discrimination to try to help women and minority-owned businesses. So I believe that that constitutional conflict also needs to be resolved, and it is one of the constitutional conflicts that can be resolved by the Equal Rights Amendment, which has also been pending with regard to the removal of the deadline in Congress.
Thank you so much. I now call on representing the minority, Representative Sessions, and I want to thank him for his hard work on raising money for breast cancer research. We worked together on a coin that raised money for research, and I appreciate his help. Would never have passed without him. Thank you. Representative Sessions.
Chairwoman, thank you very much. And it's a delight to be with each of you today. And I want to thank each of our panelists who are here to provide professional input to this. Senator, I would like to engage you first. Have you ever worked in the free enterprise system?
Private sector.
Oh, no, I have not worked in the private sector.
Okay. I spent 16 years, moved 7 times, was with a rather large company, and each of the jobs, each of the years that I was paid, I was the lowest on the totem pole because I was the newest employee. As I was promoted 3 times, I was always at the bottom, literally, in the entire company. And this company called AT&T had lots of employees, but I was at the bottom because I was a brand new or newer in my job title. And so each of the times that I got promoted and moved, I would receive some sort of treatment in my pay based upon a zone or the size of the city. But every time I was the lowest pay because on average, the people who had been there were there for 17 years, had received COLA payments, had received other things throughout their years. Under your way of thinking, and perhaps under the law that you are proposing or pushing, do you think that day one, I would receive the equal or same pay as someone who had had my same job 17 years, my senior?
So it sounds like you had a good union job.
I'm
And
not a union, ma'am. I'm not. I was a summer worker. I was a full-time employee.
you were
I
a
was a
summer worker
manager.
with AT&T. Well, that's interesting because AT&T has traditionally been quite a good union employer with the Communication Workers of America.
Yes, ma'am, but
And
I'm
I
in a
can't
right
speak
to
to
work
exactly.
state.
I'm sorry, I'm going to answer your question. Is the Congresswoman's trying to say something?
Can you hear her?
Oh, no, I'm talking to my kids.
That's great. That's great. Well, first off, let me correct the record. I mean, I usually, so much of my career has actually been in government, but my first job was actually working at a law firm in my district in Jackson Heights, where I picked up the phone, I was a receptionist, and I was paid $300 a week. It wasn't a big firm, there weren't that many people, but it was certainly, I was certainly underpaid considering what the minimum wage was at the time. It was an agreement I had. It was my first job, and looking back towards that, I can't speak to your experience, but I think that there is something to say about merit and something to say about seniority for sure, which is where I was going with in talking about collective bargaining and ensuring that, there is somewhat of a meritocracy that we live in. What we're talking about is equal pay for equal work. So any other woman who had the same summer job as you and performed the same duties as you should be making the same money as you. So it's not about comparing you to people who have a lot more seniority and therefore a lot more experience on the job. This is a lot more horizontal than it is vertical.
Well, and I would encourage you. I think
Gentlemen,
that most
Gentlemen's time has expired. If you'll put your question in the chat, we'll make sure it gets answered, but we
Appreciate
have a
that,
time
Chairwoman.
limit. We have another hour in this room and then we have to leave. So we have to keep to our time limit because I want more, some discretion. Okay, we'll get back to you after we get through the other members. I now recognize Congressman Lynch for 3 minutes and thank him for his leadership on all of these issues too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wonderful to be with all these amazing panelists. Let me just follow up on my colleagues' questions. So I'm a former president of the Iron Workers Union in Boston, went on to become a labor attorney. So also in the state Senate, Senator Ramos, I was chair of the Joint Committee on Commerce and Labor. So we share that distinction, and congratulations on your good work. I do want to point out that, so I went on to become a labor attorney. I represented, interestingly, given Professor Gabori's comments, I've represented unions that were 80%, 90% men. And then I also represented women-dominated unions in the theatrical union, the wardrobe workers, 90% women. And I've often struggled with that dynamic on how to blend out these different unions and make it more equal. But Professor, that's the first time I've heard anybody address that in any meaningful way. So congratulations to you and your good work. When in the union environment, we have when a new worker comes in, to address the question of seniority, when a new worker comes in, when I was an apprentice boy, I earned originally about 70% of what a journey person would earn. So no, typically in a union environment, the new person does not get the full wages. However, as a union president, and I want to go back to Senator Ramos's comments regarding collective bargaining. Once I had a woman on the job, I didn't have to worry that she wasn't getting dollar for dollar, penny for penny, the same wages that her male co-worker was getting. And that was an enormous relief to me once I got that woman on the job. And first of all, she had to complete an apprentice program, right? So her wage skills, her work skills were up there, and she was proven to be a competent worker in that field. Once that woman got plugged in on the job, I didn't have to worry. She was getting the exact same wages, the exact same benefits, the exact same health care, the exact same retirement benefits that her male counterparts were earning. And so I actually think that's part of a solution. And the question is how, and it goes to both Senator Ramos's question about collective bargaining and the impact of that. We just passed the PRO Act in the House. I'm very proud of that, to protect the right to organize and the right to be a member of a union, to have a voice in the workplace. And also Professor Gabori, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, talking to her issue about making sure we have full and equal participation in these different unions. But Senator Ramos, is there something that you're thinking about in terms of how to extend those collective bargaining benefits and the voice in the workplace to women on an equal basis?
Thank you so much for the question, Congressman. It's really an honor to be interacting with you right now. I didn't know of your background and that you're part of our labor family as well. It's true, we are striving in New York to create an environment that's much friendlier to union organizing, to workers organizing on the job. And, we're eagerly here in New York rooting for the Senate to pass the PRO Act as well. I mean, I won't, get into the weeds too much, but, Uber and Lyft are here trying to impose their model of unemployment insurance and workman's comp on our, New York workers, whereas what we're trying to do, what I have legislation to do, is ban captive audience meetings, figure out how it is that we can protect workers from being covered or overwhelmed with corporate propaganda at work. As as we speak, workers who work in Amazon warehouses on Staten Island are organizing, trying to get better conditions and better pay on the job. We are seeing a lot of precarious working conditions here in New York across several sectors, not only the gig economy, not only in warehouses, but on construction sites where so many of our undocumented immigrants are especially taken care of. So to me, it's really about lifting that union standard and making sure that, that as many New Yorkers as possible are covered. This is why I bring up collective bargaining in these spaces where we talk about women's pay, because often, especially immigrant women, are not necessarily supported in their organizing efforts, are not aware of their rights. And here in New York, our undocumented population has rights, nevertheless. So we strive to educate our workers, and we're striving to, fight the impact of Janus, of the so-called right to work laws, and other poisonous, I was going to say poison pills, but they're not even pills. I mean, it's just terrible legislation that has made it very difficult for us to increase our union density and therefore grow the middle class in our country.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize the gentle lady, Representative Tlaib, who is obviously a great mother, talking to her son during the hearing. She often brings her children to Congress. It's always great to see them. And you are now recognized for 3 minutes, Congresswoman.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. So I'm really happy. One of the first things I got to participate in is, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz created Mamas in Congress. And I wasn't really sure about the group, so I showed up, and it was amazing because of our shared lived experiences, not only obviously in the workforce and doing the work we're doing. I don't care if it was managing everything, but we both also had children while serving in office, and just even those struggles. And again, I can't compare that with a lot of our neighbors across the country and their struggles in the workforce, especially those that are in situations where discrimination is because they're a woman, but primarily also because they're mothers. I find that one of my first jobs I interviewed for, the person asked if I planned to get pregnant, which is illegal. But I didn't even know what my rights were in regards to that. I don't want to be able to that right for me to have a child, but also be mistreated in the workplace. And this was a nonprofit organization that I was applying for. But I find that still continues to be this constant dilemma and challenge for many, I think, really moms across the country, of course, women in general, but especially those that are mothers or even traditional mothers or chosen mothers or whatever it is so incredibly difficult to find places to nurse, to find moments to deal, because every pregnancy is different. Every post-pregnancy experience is different and sometimes can be very traumatic. And so I would love for you all to talk a little bit about that, because, I love being a mother in the space that I am, because it really does help me stay grounded and focused. I don't know how to explain to you all. It's like things were kind of blurred. And as soon as a child is put into my hands, and I became a mother, everything became clearer. Climate crisis, the future immigration system, the workforce, ending poverty and what's happening to our children that are getting denied access to clean water, all of that. I want to hear from all of you in regards to that, because I think it's important. I watched, and as Congressman Lynch also represented clients, I had a client at the Sugar Law Center for Economic and Social Justice when I was an attorney there. We represented a woman who was a firefighter, proud firefighter, and she got pregnant. And just, as went on, her doctor's like, hey, you can't do some of the heavy lifting, all these things. Her male counterpart, y'all, male counterpart who got injured, not at work, off work doing something else, was given some leeway and reduced what they call weight limitations, all those kinds of things. But she wasn't. And they blamed it on, well, that wasn't as if she was supposed to consummate this child in the workplace. Oh, well, that wasn't created because of the workforce, right? It's that kind of idiocy and just kind of madness that drives me crazy, especially those that say family values. But then it was us women saying, We want to be moms, but we also want to be firefighters. We want to be members of Congress. We want to be those that help in poverty, whatever it is. And so it is so hard. And again, I can't stress to you enough, being a mom, and I know Debbie Wasserman Schultz can agree to this. I mean, I'm in the kitchen, I'll do things, and I'm, doing my teenage son will say, Mom, what is this? How do you do this? And I was like, honey, I don't know, go there's search engines, kind of figure it out, because I really don't know the answer. He's like, and you're supposed to be a congresswoman? I mean, that to me is like a moment of why it is so incredibly special to be in these spaces, especially in the workforce, because if anything, we really do clear it. It's not as foggy. It's so focused of what is at stake. So I would love, again, to hear about that struggle, again, of moms in the workplace, especially now more than ever, y'all. COVID, not having schools in session. I mean, you have no idea. If I was having the challenge that I was having, I can't imagine many of the moms in my community, in my district. Chairwoman, I'm not in the room if anybody wants to answer that, yeah.
I'm happy to jump in first. And again, Denora Gatacho, CEO of DoSomething.org. And I want to first bring to answer your question, Congressmember Tlaib, the presence of young people, right? DoSomething.org is a 28-year-old nonprofit, and it's youth-led, right? It's a movement that young people themselves are leading around cause and what matters to them. And you're right, every day, young people are saying, there's intersectionality, right, to the professor's point, around all of these issues, and how do we manifest that? I think this is a pivotal inflection point for not just America, for the entire world, right? Coming out of this pandemic, and I don't know where we are in this marathon journey, but let's hope we're closer to the end of the 26.2 miles. If we don't actually learn from this moment and then go back to the dangerous and I think very unsustainable ways of the pre-COVID, we have done ourselves and society a disservice, right? The fact that this all has been laid bare, as we've all talked about, the fact that we know the facts around the inequities. As a Black woman, I make 52 cents on the dollar of a white man. That's problematic, and I'm working hard, right? So I'd like my whole dollar. If we don't actually address the structural inequities that have gotten us to this moment. So it's not just about acknowledging the problem, it's showing what the root causes of the problem are and then taking systemic action to address them. So it's everything from making sure that we're not using Band-Aid solutions. We need full-time school for children, right, in person in a safe way. We need childcare for younger children to make sure that mothers can actually go back to work. We need retraining programs to support moms with getting back into the workforce and making sure that they can upskill and be competitive for jobs that are not just frontline worker jobs, right? I think of Black women in particular who are more often than not in the healthcare industry, as cashiers, as elementary school teachers. They have higher aspirations, but those are the jobs that provide them with the flexibility and the ability to be there for their families. I also think about this from a personal perspective, and I think many of my Gen X colleagues would agree with me, which is I'm in this sandwich generation, right? So I've got elders who I'm helping to care for, right? As much as I have my 9 and 10-year-old daughters who I was homeschooling while running a nonprofit during the pandemic. And so I think we need to address that root cause as well. And then the last thing I would think about is we're all talking about what return to work means, but we haven't actually set up the systems designed for success for that. So if women can't actually return to work because they're still doing all of the unpaid labor of mothering and caring for others, then we're just setting up a system that is designed to continue to perpetuate the inequities that have gotten us to this moment. And then the last thing I'll say is thinking about access to banking. There are so many communities that are underbanked, and so we have to continue to work in frontline working jobs because we can't afford to be upskilled or to get an education to have more high achieving jobs. And so I think this opportunity today to really put all of the systemic solutions on the table to make sure that we are planning for how we actually address this problem is what we should be continuing to talk about and solve for.
Yeah, I know I'm out of time. Thank you so much, Chairwoman. Just if the panel can take a look at my Boost Act, I will share it with all of you. It is something that came from the Mothers and Children Roundtable that I had in my district. And it would uplift 45% of people living in poverty out of poverty. So it's something to take a look at. Thank you so much, Chairwoman.
Great. Lifting them out of poverty. Why don't you describe your Boot Act? I think we'd all like to hear it.
Oh, no. So the Boost Act is the closest thing to universal basic income. I know people are not always there, but it is kind of EITC, earned income tax credit on steroids is what I call it. So it's $3,000 to $6,000 per family making less than $100,000. And instantly, from the data we got from CRS and others, it would lift, again, 45% of people living in poverty, including the children and everybody attached to that person, is uplifted out of poverty because of that. And again, it's earned income tax credit was the most successful anti-poverty program for a very long time, but now because the cost of living has increased and we haven't been able to expand it in a way that I think would be as successful, I think that's why the Boost Act takes a different direction and is much more inclusive, Chairwoman.
Thank you so much for your hard work. I now have the opportunity to recognize Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who is the founder of the Moms Congress, Caucus in Congress, and many, many other things. And I can say that after very close personal observation, since we share a house together, she is an excellent mother and Congresswoman. Very good to see you, and you are now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much. Not at all surprised that with your leadership, it would be convened by you to talk about this really critical issue. And we having lived together for 16 years and balancing work and family in real time, our member mom house, when we all had school-age kids at the same time, really was a living, breathing petri dish of how you make it all work. And so for me, when I was first elected to Congress, there really weren't many mothers with school-age children who were balancing life as member moms. And Rashida, Congresswoman Tlaib, thank you so much. This is really a sisterhood. Sorry about that. Thank you so much for acknowledging that the Moms in the House Caucus was so necessary, because I didn't really have that many women members to turn to who'd been balancing that work and family with young kids. I was pregnant during my first campaign for Congress with my youngest child, and she was 1, and my twins were 5 when I was sworn in. We now have 37 moms of school-age children in Congress, more than ever, and it's time that we, as a body, properly address the problems that impact women, but particularly moms, and especially the gender wage gap. But I really want to focus a little bit more, now that we've been able to see through this pandemic. I mean, there are some silver linings. One of those is that we were able to see how you actually can do a lot of work from home, which gives women and parents more flexibility to be able to balance that work and family and not have to choose between being the consummate professional or the consummate parent. Lauren Bauer, a fellow in economic studies at the Brookings Institution, said that moms are seeking something called, quote, unicorn jobs that are flexible because of gaps in childcare. And it's hard to find a position with the flexibility that you need to care for kids, especially with childcare centers or schools that aren't fully reopened or operating regularly. And frankly, just the changing needs day to day of when you need to be with your kids and when you need to be at work. So Dr. Sook, I want to ask you about the notion of those unicorn jobs, because they inherently, by being called unicorn jobs, mean they don't really exist. How can the gender wage gap of moms close if they're searching for those elusive, flexible jobs that are non-existent right now?
Well, I think first and foremost, beginning with pregnant workers, there need to be regulations that require employers to be flexible even within the workplace. So the Pregnant Worker Fairness Act is something that's very important, actually, to equal pay for moms, not just moms keeping their jobs while they're pregnant and protecting the life of the unborn and wanted child while they're in the workplace. But if they stay in their jobs instead of having to quit or be fired because of their need for accommodations, that is going to preserve both their standing with their workplace and their long-term attachment to the firm. Because if you get fired when you're pregnant and then you have to find another job and you're looking for a unicorn job, your bargaining position is going to be far worse than it would have been had you been able to stay in that same job and earn some seniority there. So I think it begins with pregnancy. And then one thing that the pandemic has made really clear is that it is possible to get a lot of the work done with regard to working from home. And it has helped parents and given them some flexibility. So I think that one thing that we might be seeing is increased demands by workers to be able to work from home. And it's possible that the inflexibility that you're seeing in the workplace can be seen now because we have so much more data about business, whether or not it's really necessary for businesses to force people to come in at all times and work on a rigid schedule. Because we know that's no longer necessary, if you think about traditional employment discrimination claims, that is its disparate impact on the basis of sex, if parents, and particularly mothers, are disproportionately disadvantaged by rigid workplace rules when we now know that it's not necessary to have those rules in order to maintain productivity. So I think we might see some changes in the way we think about what sex discrimination is as it's litigated, because we now know what's possible that we didn't know before the pandemic.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I know my time's expired, but thank you for providing a forum for us to talk about the quiet parts out loud here. Because this is, so many of these conversations are whispered by working moms who, really are worried about whether or not they're going to lose their jobs or be able to make sure that they could advance in the places they work. And so when we come together and have a chance to talk about that and find solutions to some of those problems, then it's just so important. So that's why your work, your leadership on this committee is so critical. And let me just close by acknowledging, I just lost my mom at the beginning of April, but she proudly attended Hunter College as a college student. So I just wanted to thank you for having it at the place that my mom went to school.
Thank you for
Thank you.
sharing. Yes,
Madam
Mr.
Chairman,
Yes,
Madam Chairman,
yes,
earlier,
Mhm.
earlier, as I was acknowledged and you gave me 3 minutes, immediately at the end of 3 minutes and in the middle of a question, and you stopped in the middle of a question and told me that we had a time limit that would be strictly adhered to. Are you still providing that same guidance to people?
Mr. Sessions, you are recognized for as much time as you'd like to consume.
Well, Madam Chairman, I was not seeking that, but thank you.
Uh-huh.
I would like to go back to the panel and ask them specifically, and Senator, I'll come back to you. I'm in reference to non-union jobs because I believe many union jobs, as in the military, as in the federal government, that there are pay scales based upon time in service, time in location, but in the private sector, which is primarily where I believe that this effort to your questioning finds itself, I would like to have some discussion with you about how you would see the formation of the law of what would be required upon what I would call a non-union, non-government job, to where people would find themselves having to be equal work, equal pay, and how you might position that in the law.
Well, Congressman, this is why I'm advocating for collective bargaining agreements. As long as it's written down, it's very clear to all workers involved how much you're expected to earn, what your benefits are. I don't see how that would be guaranteed without a collective bargaining agreement. I mean, if we're talking about independent contractors, true independent contractors that actually have a contract with the person who's hiring them for the gig, then that's something else. But willy-nilly, without having those the pay and benefits outlined, there is no guarantee that the same people are getting paid the same for doing the same work, which is what we're talking about.
So, okay, well, let me make sure I know, because that's not what I'm talking about. I was talking about a management employee, a person who would agree that they would come and open up a place, that they would train employees, that they would be there after hours, that they would provide feedback to employees, that they would be expected to represent their company, perhaps on the weekend and at night, perhaps at a chamber of commerce, perhaps at a union meeting. I'm talking about a non-craft or wage employee, but rather a management person. Would you intend that your legislation would say to the marketplace for management that there must be a union set up within your management?
I'm sorry, which legislation of mine are you talking about?
Well, we're talking about, you've talked about ideas that we need to move. And so I suppose that as a state senator, you're used to your ideas being forced in, becoming a part of a law.
Oh, indeed. I just thought you were referring to a specific bill that I may have referred to. I mean, as we know, management cannot join unions, and what they do utilize as a recourse often, and especially where there are big employers, is human resources, right? And utilizing that department or that person in the business in order to determine whether they are being treated fairly or to report unfair treatment in any sort of way. Here in New York, we've advanced legislation to ensure that we are a protected class as women and that we are not discriminated against based on our gender, based on whether we are a mother, based on whether we're a transgender woman. It does not matter. This is how we've been trying to make sure that as many women have the ability to complain and seek wages that have been stolen from them, because that's exactly what this is. Pay inequality is wage theft.
The gentleman's,
Oh.
Professor Gabori has requested equal time to respond. Professor, you're now
That would be great.
recognized.
And Chairwoman, thank you. I am interested in their specific feedback. And I believe we got close to saying probably not management. In other words, what I would call a white collar worker versus a blue collar worker. She did not believe that that should be part of the law, of updating or changing the law. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Professor Gabori.
I'd like to address this question specifically around management. I mean, I teach courses in gender and the law, and among the courses that I teach is the lawsuits that happened across more than 10 years around, for example, the gender discrimination that happened at Walmart. And in the Walmart case, precisely, as I think many people know because it's a very well-known sex discrimination case, is precisely the question of the promotion of men into management positions and sales positions while women persistently remained part-time cashiers. And so I am exactly concerned when I raise the question of occupational silos about the question of men's greater opportunities in management positions, oftentimes when they do not, as the example that you raised at the beginning of your questions here today, do not have more years on the job, do not necessarily have more experience, and the data shows us persistently in sex discriminations that are brought in many circumstances, men being promoted past women because they are seen as having characteristics that make them suited for management in ways that women, and specifically mothers, are not. That mothers are discriminated against for the perceptions that they need to leave to take care of sick children, that they need to leave to attend to children, and are discriminated in the workplace and do not receive those opportunities for precisely those promotions. And I think it's a problem in both unionized shops. I speak here as someone who is active within my own union and sees sex discrimination, in both unionized shops and not unionized shops, right? I mean, as Congress Member Lynch mentioned, right? I mean, we see occupational silos, right, in just this way. We see occupational silos, right, in construction work and non-construction work, right? And so, but I am exactly concerned about the kind of managerial things, and I guess I would want to ask you, since we do see managerial disparities and promotion disparities and occupational silos in management jobs, what would you do about it?
Well, the first thing I'd do is let you know that you are here to offer your feedback. I am not here to be questioned, but I will be very, no, that's correct. We do not question each other. This is a hearing. I was chairman of the Rules Committee for 8 years. Witnesses were not there to question members. But I will accept the challenge that you gave me. What I would say to you is that when you make a determination that you would like to be in management, that it is a different viewpoint than one might have had as when I was a craft employee. I was a craft employee. I was covered by a contract. I was covered by when I would report to work, what training I would receive, what pay I would receive. When you go into management, generally speaking, management could be at a Subway store, or it could be at a large company like AT&T. And it's up to the structure of that to treat their employees well and to pay them. But it's also up to an employee to be flexible enough to recognize that if you're going to be within management and placed within, it's one thing to be in running a company, running a store, running an office versus being in HR. And I do understand that there are differences there. What I would say to you is that I would find a way to be fair to every employee, and that would mean a management, and that would mean that you had a written plan.
Thank you. Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired, and
Madam Chairman, you gave me as much time as I wish to consume, as I understand it.
we have other people and participants that have not been able to express themselves.
I will accept that.
And
I
in terms of
appreciate the gentleman.
fairness, it's important, these are all recognized professionals who are giving their mornings, their day to this discussion. This is not a hearing, this is a discussion. It's a different format. And I feel that out of the consideration of their expertise, they must be recognized.
Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you. I would now like to call on Mrs. Kawana, who hasn't spoken yet in this thing, to express some information to us. I understand you are part of the Power New York, a group of advocates and professionals fighting to advance women's equity and economic equity especially. Can you tell us more about the Working Woman's Bill of Rights, especially the equal pay provision, and how you've seen women of color leading the way on pay equity?
Thank you, Chairwoman. So a big piece of our initiative is the Working Woman's Bill of Rights, which is a holistic and intersectional agenda for women's economic equality that spans 13 different issue areas, anywhere from pay equity to sexual harassment to public benefits to collective bargaining and organizing. In our work, we found that there are so many overlaps in the ways in which women are subjected to gender-based discrimination. Pay inequity is oftentimes a form of pregnancy discrimination. Sexual harassment is exacerbated by wage insecurity. Additionally, we see that the lack of paid family leave results in significant loss of income over time for women. And our goal with the Working Women's Bill of Rights was really to put all of these issues into a framework in one place and to recognize that we cannot meaningfully advance gender equality unless we are looking at the ways in which these issues are so interconnected and unless we are tackling all of them. Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton raised the question of, are women going to rebound? And I think the pandemic has exacerbated long-standing disparities that we are very familiar with. I think it's both a reminder of how far behind we are, but I think it is also such an important opportunity for transformative change. We have no choice but to make sure women return to the workforce on equal footing. And this is really our shot. With respect to equal pay and equal pay practices, it is a multifaceted problem that requires a multi-pronged approach, and we need to be very proactive at this juncture to make sure we're making progress. We need to force employers to be more transparent about pay practices. One way where you're seeing women of color lead the way is in introducing powerful, innovative legislation that really stands to benefit women of color. Senator Ramos mentioned several pieces of legislation she's working on, but in New York State, she also introduced a transformative pay disclosure bill that would require all employers in the state to disclose pay, salary, or salary ranges at the front end of the process, so that you know going into the job what the pay range is. I mean, this is a very simple concept, but it's a very different way of doing things. And it will advance pay equity for women simply by opening up the information, by eliminating opportunities for implicit and overt bias to come into the salary setting process. In addition to that, we need to be focusing on the fact that today the majority of minimum wage workers are still women. That's unacceptable. We need to raise the stagnant and egregiously low minimum wage. We need to eliminate the tipped minimum wage, which disproportionately impacts women. And we need to be working towards a living wage for all workers across the United States. The fact that this is a controversial concept to me is ridiculous. And then I think beyond that, today, women's work is still synonymous with low wage work. We have a huge problem with occupational segregation. We need to begin the process of reevaluating how we value work so that women's work is no longer low wage work. And that conversation really needs to start today. And we need to force employers to stop relying on salary history. This is, something that with women and people of color historically are coming to the table with lower wages. And so by relying on salary history, employers are inevitably injecting discrimination into their processes. And we need to have comprehensive support systems for families, including paid family leave, paid sick time, health care, accommodations for pregnancy, greater workplace flexibility. And, we are thrilled to see the American Families Plan take us a step closer towards that, in that direction. And, we need to keep moving that way.
Thank you so much. I'd like to ask Senator Ramos if she could give us an update on what is happening in the New York State Legislature to advance equal pay for equal work, improve working conditions, support for families. What can we look to this year? We have a great year going on in Congress, I got to tell you that much. We've got a lot of proposals. But I want to know what's happening in New York State.
That's good to hear. I do have a little rundown here about everything that we've done from 2019 being a pivotal year in the New York State Legislature, of course. The Republicans had been in control of the state Senate for so long that when we came in 2019, I believe we really hit the ground running and have started to turn the tide against discriminatory practices. We passed the Equal Pay for All, which prohibits a differential rate of pay based on protected class status. I referred to this a little earlier. We also passed the Fair and Non-Biased Compensation for Protected Classes, which establishes a policy of equal pay for all public sector employees on the basis of protected class, and created a private right of action for these employees to have a mechanism in which to challenge any discrepancies in that. We did pass a bill to ban salary history inquiries, and that prohibits employers from asking prospective employees for wage and salary history as a requirement for a job interview, job application, job offer, or even a promotion. And we passed the Equal Pay for Public Employees, again, which is a state policy that ensures that public employees receive fair and equal pay by substantially similar work. Those are things that we've done since, among others, of course, because this work is so intersectional. But thank you for shouting out my my range disclosure bill, we are trying to build transparency and accountability into the hiring system. Much harder to do, of course, in the private sector than the public sector, where we are the employer too. But the absence of transparency in these pay practices has been a leading factor in pay discrimination, and has perpetuated environments that foster systemic racial and gender biases and disparities. So there is a lot that we have done. There's a lot more to do. And I referred to, us tackling childcare. I also have a bill to create a special task force at the state level in order to zero in on how we can reduce child poverty in New York by 50% over the next 10 years. Huge New York City issue, but also a huge Rochester and Syracuse issue. Here in New York, unfortunately, we're the state with the largest income inequality, and that's even by pre-pandemic standards in the entire country. So I'm very thankful for this space and be able to talk to all of you about how we can move this forward, because there is a lot more to do, and we're hoping at the federal level, you, of course, Chairwoman, can guide us and hopefully make women's lives a little easier and more stable.
That's an impressive record. In the state Senate. We congratulate you for all your work. The first equal rights, equal pay for equal work was 1963, and many times when they go to the courts, it's struck down because women are not in the Constitution and discrimination is not against the law. So many of these cases fail. So I'd like to ask one of the leading academics on the Equal Rights Amendment and equal pay for equal work, Dr. Sook, if you could comment on the Equal Rights Amendment, why we need it, just your comments on where we stand. As Ruth Bader Ginsburg has so rightfully said, women's rights will never be protected unless they are in the Constitution of the United States of America. Do you think we can protect women's rights with our laws, or do we need to be in the Constitution? Professor Sook, thank you for joining us and for all your hard work over your lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question, Chairwoman Maloney. So the Equal Rights Amendment is important to bolstering the legislation that makes equality real for women. So let me explain. The Equal Pay Act currently says equal pay for equal work, but also has a provision saying that if the pay differential is based on any other factor other than sex, that pay differential will be okay. And what that means is that there are a lot of practices that are not transparent that hide the real discrimination. What the Equal Rights Amendment would do was clearly authorize Congress to go beyond and fix some of the inadequacies of the Equal Pay Act by making more robust laws. And we can look at the example of other countries. Other countries have provisions in their constitution since the end of World War II guaranteeing the equal rights of women and men. And what that means is that for sure, in the context of public employment, you're going to see equal pay practices just as a result of the constitutional amendment. But more importantly, in many of these other countries, it has authorized the legislature to pass robust laws that specifically take into account the equal pay of women and groups that have historically been discriminated against. Here in the United States, it might be very important following the pandemic to have specific legislation that targets women business owners and gives them a boost. And it's important that the Equal Rights Amendment is there to make it clear that Congress has the authority to do that, to make it clear that the Congress has the authority to pass the Pregnant Worker Fairness Act, should it be challenged in litigation, and to legitimize the efforts of women who have been working for the Equal Rights Amendment because of all of the subtle barriers to full professional equality over the past 100 years.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ms. Gabori, given your expertise in LGBTQIA issues and that we are currently celebrating Pride Month, please tell us about how longstanding discrimination like the gender wage gap impacts LGBTQ families. For example, if a family has two mothers, are they doubly hurt by income inequalities and inequities?
Indeed, they are doubly hurt by income inequality, and suffer from some of the same problems that people who earn similar amounts in households do, and sometimes don't receive some of the same, are sometimes hurt by some of the kinds of tax inequities where there is not a higher earner and a lower earner, right, in terms of the marriage gap questions in the some of the federal tax rules that might penalize them. But they also face, right, but they also face homophobia specifically, right? And that isn't, unfortunately, something that is persistently true and is true, you know, and remains true. And the question of that couple's earning, right, a lesbian family with two moms, right, in terms of their earning capacity, there's going to be a number of different reasons why, right, they are going to face specific challenges. I do sometimes envy a double mom caregiving structure household in that it might be more equitable, but that might be my own fantasy that I am projecting right upon them. So there's that question. But it's precisely true, and it also would be true, of course, in the case of it also would be, of course, true in the case of a lesbian mother who was a single mother, right, who would both then face the double jeopardy or double problems of being the breadwinner, right, and potentially facing wage discrimination. One of the things that I we've talked about here at different conferences at Hunter College around LGBTQ discrimination is people now coming out as teenagers, and being very proud and coming out as college students. And then they have come back here to Hunter College as professionals and testified about going back into the closet in their professional lives. And it included people who worked in medicine at hospitals that are just blocks away from here, that they did not feel comfortable being out as gay and lesbian trans hospital workers just down the street in hospital settings, or that it was something that they knew that they were going to face potential like siloing and discrimination in their careers. And so that is something that is the recloseting of folks is something within professional environments is something that I think we really have to grapple with.
Ask all of you to comment if you'd like, but starting with Ms. Kawaha. In all of your research and in your work, what have been some of the innovative policies implemented here in America, in New York City, or that you've seen in America, or in other countries to curb pay disparities and discrimination against women in the workplace? What are some of the new ideas we should be looking at? Would you like to begin? No. But you haven't, I would like you to, I'd like you to begin and we can go down the line, okay?
I was happy to defer to my colleagues who have more substantive expertise. I think some of the solutions that Senator Ramos has lifted up about what we're trying to do here in New York as it relates to pay disparity, pay transparency, and greater efficiency in the process is key. But this is not the area where I have the most expertise, so I was happy to defer to my colleagues who have more expertise.
It's a great question, Chairwoman, and I think one thing we need to start with is a broader problem. Under our existing system of laws, the burden lies almost primarily on some of the most vulnerable women in our country to identify, to challenge, and to correct pay discrimination in our country. And that's a huge problem because women should not be bearing that burden alone. I think one of the things, the way we need to shift the conversation is that we are at a juncture where it's essential that employers who are perpetuating these wage disparities take on that responsibility and that onus as well. And so, that's why I mentioned the importance of legislation that really shifts the way employers do salary, in which they do retention and hiring and promotion. We need to have a more transparent system in which women have the information that they need to actually identify the disparities. And for the most part, we want employers to be creating fair environments. And I think a lot of employers really do want to be creating fair work environments. I mean, it doesn't benefit anybody to have a place of employment where you are perpetuating gender and racial and other forms of disparities. So pay transparency, and we've seen a bunch of recommendations there, and we've seen there a bunch of provisions within the Paycheck Fairness Act that will advance that. So there's a pay data reporting provision that was previously tried to be enforced under the through the EEOC. That's a pretty important one. In addition to pay data reporting, we want employers to conduct pay audits. We mentioned, New York is leading the way, and Colorado is another state that's enacted a pay disclosure bill. But in addition to that, I think, like I was mentioning before, we have a huge issue about occupational segregation. So I think we need to be moving beyond the discussion of equal pay for equal worth. We need to be having a conversation about equal pay for work of comparable value, equal pay for work of equivalent value, because we need to be looking at why so many women are working in these low wage occupations and men are working in much higher paid occupations. And that's one area in which countries around the world are really focusing more on these concepts than we are in the United States. And I think we need to be turning to them to really start that conversation.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Yes, well, I'll focus on two very important things. The first is more women at the decision-making table. And in many countries around the world throughout the 1990s, they adopted laws that required gender parity on corporate boards, gender parity also in the political realm with regard to political party lists for certain elections, but very importantly in the private sector, gender parity in decision-making bodies. And that was something that was permitted by the Constitution. They had to amend the Constitution to boost the equal rights provisions, the gender equality provisions in the Constitution, to authorize legislative measures to require gender balance in decision-making power. And so that was an amendment that we saw in France, and then it had spillover effects into legislation in the private sector as well. In 2018, in part because the constitutional amendment said equal access by men and women to positions of professional and social responsibility, there was a legislation in France requiring an equality index. So every corporation has to measure equality based on things like how many women got a promotion after they came back from maternity leave, or what is the overall pay gap within the company? What is the percentage of women and men in the highest paid jobs? So every company gets a score and they have to publish that score on their website. And if the score falls below a certain level, they have 3 years to fix it before they get fined. And so I think that these kinds of measures put the onus on the employers rather than on victims of discrimination to fix any problems. And it goes to every level: legislation, constitutional amendment, and private sector activity.
I can just tell you that now that we have an influx where we have almost a third of Congress are women, it's such a different feeling on how our issues are being looked at and how we're actually treated, quite frankly. And for the first time in my life, we have enough votes to preserve Roe v. Wade in Congress. We never had that before. Every year, I used to keep a scorecard. I got to 350 times they had chipped away at Roe in different ways. I got so discouraged, I stopped keeping my scorecard. But having more women is so very, very important. And I've had a bill in for years with Congressman Meeks that would just require, through the SEC disclosure, that boards reveal how many women and minorities are in their leadership. Not demanding, but just disclose it. And it's always been a big pushback on just disclosure. So the point you're making is really very valid, and I think we should look at that law you've been talking about. So thank you, and not last but not least, but Professor and Congressperson, Senator will have the last word here. Okay,
I would
Yes.
like to agree with my colleagues around the questions of both transparency and calling greater attention to occupational segregation. The degree to which we are able to think about why people are not just stuck around pay ceilings, but are stuck within particular kinds of professions. I have a student here at Hunter College who was my own child's caregiver in the first year of his life. What she is facing right now as a part-time student is the question about whether or not to go back to childcare work or hospitality work while she remains a student. When I think about the questions about us returning from the pandemic, when I see in the media the pieces around like job hesitancy and returning to particular kind of conditions, I have to say I want to celebrate some of this. We need more hesitancy. We need, right? I mean, I think this is something I'm hearing everybody saying here today. We need more people asking questions about like why should we return to some of these conditions. And by the way, I was able to hire my childcare worker who was amazing because I was the first person she interviewed with for whom I said yes and thought it was terrific that she was going to bring her kid with her and into my house, and that now my child and her child are best friends. But it was the first home she had interviewed with where I was the first family that considered like bringing her kid with her, right? And so it also underscores the necessity of us like thinking more obviously in the places we started the conversation about kind of like childcare in the workplace, childcare in different spaces, right? Alongside of the kinds of work that women are doing often in other kinds of spaces, right? We've talked about like home and home flexibility, but domestic work, and the need for like why we in New York State have made some progress on that at the federal level, like that is one of the things, right, that obviously needs more attention and bolstering, right, across the board. And it's something that would be really terrific to see.
Well, I mean, I guess just to add some framing to these wonderful contributions, I just don't think that there will ever have as great of a pivotal moment to really turn the workplace on its head. Work has changed forever because of the pandemic. And it's up to us to make sure that we are creating lasting change in the work culture and environment that hires, retains, and promotes women in the workforce. I love that you talked about domestic work because domestic work has value as well. And as we start talking, too bad the Congresswoman is no longer here, to talk about her Boost Act, it really does, in my opinion, when we talk about UBI in whatever form, conceptually, it values the contributions that the stay-at-home parent makes towards the home. It's been increasingly difficult for anyone to figure out how to juggle their job, remote learning, childcare. It's too much, I guess I would want to circle back to where I started in saying that if our goal, no matter what party we belong to, if our goal is to make sure that we are living happier lives, then that means that we need to remediate these stresses one way or another. Oh, my friend is back. One way or another, and make sure that we are advancing and taking advantage of this moment to really do away with what's been oppressing women for so long, especially women of color.
Thank you for that very inspiring statement and challenge. We do have an incredible opportunity with a president and a vice president that is championing women's rights for the first time really strongly with very ambitious statements. I now recognize Ranking Member Sessions for making his closing statement, representing the Republican Party in our discussions. Thank you for joining us today. Representative Sessions, do you have a closing statement?
I do, Chairwoman, and thank you very much. And thank you to each of our participants on this important discussion that does need to take place. And I encourage us to do this as we move forward, as we come up with new answers and a discussion. Their dialogue with members of Congress is important. And members of Congress need to understand that out in the marketplace, There is a sense of disparity. There's a sense of perhaps unequalness. But I would like to say on behalf of the Republican Party that we're for jobs. We're for jobs in the marketplace because not everybody can find a job that would provide this robust opportunity to make jobs available. And during the Trump administration, there were 3 times the number of people who had pay increases and across the country than during President Obama. And I believe that that was because of the assault on employers that took place during the Obama administration years. There was a constant attack on healthcare. There was a constant attack on energy companies. There was a constant attack on banking. There was a constant attack on the free enterprise system. We are a capitalist nation, and we have the highest level of incomes of any nation, and in particular, nations that are large nations. We create jobs, we create IPOs, which create more jobs. We have a robust system. But I do acknowledge, just as the people who were witnesses today and discussed, there is no more perfect. Perfect is gone, as if it was ever here. And we do need to get to a more perfect, a more better, there's not such thing as more better, as better ability to look at people who are in the marketplace, men or women, disabled people, those that may have differences in their life, and treat people the same. I'm acutely aware of this because I have a wife. I had a wife that was in the marketplace, and she was aware of some decisions that were made that she did not agree with. I'm the father of a disabled child, a Down syndrome young man, and I openly have seen where there is probably a better way that we could get closer to providing more employment and better opportunities. But I will tell you that business, the free enterprise system, also has champions across its universe of people who do care about disabled people. They care about women. They care about mothers. They care about making sure that they are fair. And so I think what we need to do is to look at what might be the bad actors and encourage them through not only the bully pulpit that we have, but really to focus on them and to recognize what that tendency might be to not be fair. So your feedback today has been important to us. The chairwoman, who is a very dear friend of mine, is a champion for fairness, is a champion because she knows that education, she knows that healthcare, and she knows that research and development of this great nation must help all of us, not just some of us. And so I want to thank each of you for taking time to share your ideas. And Senator, I am your friend, and I appreciate you taking time, as well as the other panelists, to come be a part of what we were doing today. Chairwoman, I would yield back my time, and thank you very much.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back his time. I would like to thank all of my colleagues who joined us today in this discussion from their various sites around the country, and all of you for the work you do every day in being a panelist here and helping us really plot the next steps we need to take to help women, children, and families. I do want to add that the U.S. added 559,000 jobs in May, adding to the hope that we are finally getting out of this pandemic, and the unemployment rate has fallen to 5.8%, whereas before it was really over 10%. And this is a great step forward. But I also want to thank the Biden administration for their hard work on vaccines, something we are all working on because we will not recover without the vaccines. New York State is now at 68%. The president has said we must be at 70%. Are you listening, Senator, we've got to get there by July 4th. By July 4th, we've got to be at 70%. So all of us, if you do not have a van or you do not have access to vaccinations in any place in this great city, let us know. We will work with the mayor, with the governor, with everyone to get those vaccinations to you and out the door. In terms of childcare, one of the wonderful things that has happened in New York because of the American Rescue Plan, because we've had the money for the first time to afford it, we have expanded 3K throughout my district so that helps every working mother and father and everybody, but especially a child. I'm a former educator. All the research shows the most important thing you can do is invest in early education. We now have 3K across the great city of New York because of the American Rescue Plan, and it has come in to help in so many ways with our mass transit, with direct grants to our people, with food, with housing. It's the most comprehensive plan I've ever seen. As a former teacher, I've never seen so much money go into education, which really thrills me. I know that in my lifetime, we've made progress for women and working moms, and during my tenure in Congress, but we still have a long way to go. There were many ideas put out today. Our committee has started a review of equal pay for equal work. We are going to have a forum for each category. You've added a few categories for us today. And celebrate it, look at it, and try to figure out how we can raise the pay of Latino women, of African American women, of all women, and disabled women and men, as you pointed out, that need to be addressed. So we have a lot of work to do. We have a great country. I'm positive the best is yet to come. And I just have to end by saying that my whole life I've worked on women's issues. When I came to Congress, one of the areas that I wanted to work on was empowering women. I had 10 things I wanted to accomplish. One was the Second Avenue subway. And I built the only subway, not in New York, not in New York State, the whole country. But all of them I've accomplished and many more. But anything to help women is so hard. On my list was the Equal Rights Amendment. Every country in the world practically has it, but we have not been able to move and ratify it here in the United States. Although we got 38 states to ratify it, Virginia being the last, and we are moving forward in many ways. But it's been very, very difficult. The bill to just expose how many men and minorities and women are on boards. We haven't been able, not that we haven't tried it and pushed it. So I think we need to keep in touch and really strengthen each other with ideas and support. And I agree with Senator Ramos, we have a unique opportunity. When I first introduced paid leave for federal employees, which is in the jurisdiction of the committee I served the whole time I've been in Congress, it was almost laughed at. Why are you working on something so unimportant? I couldn't get a hearing on it. We finally passed it last year. This year, we're going to pass it to paid sick leave. But oftentimes, women's issues have been the second, third, or swept under the rug and forgotten. But not in this Congress now, and not with this president. He has come out with a plan for the American family that is so encompassing, that is so far-reaching, with paid leave, child care, the earned income tax expansion, the child care tax expansion, which if we could pass, as the senator says, would lift up many, many children out of poverty. So as she said, many of you said today, we are at a unique opportunity to get out there and fight and turn these ideas into the reality of a law, improving the lives of families across, and women, children, men, all across our country. I want to thank you all for coming. You all inspired me. You all taught me many things that I feel I can take back to my work in Congress. I hope it's been helpful to you too. Thank you so much for coming. I'm deeply appreciative. Thank you. This meeting's adjourned. Right on time. And thank you, Mr. Sessions, for joining us and representing the minority. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Chairwoman.